people say, cool, 7216 doesn't apply, so I don't have to do anything.
7216 is under the umbrella of use of information for tax preparation services.
Something akin to who's going to know?
M&A is a massive context. If you're just thinking dollars and cents, that's the one most likely to come into play.
Where people just email you and pretend like they're somebody you work with, the classic, like, could you get me some Visa gift cards and send me pictures of it?
When you contract with a third-party service provider and you make it very clear how important data protection is to your business.
That's fantastic. Talk about those. Data minimization.
When you are provisioning data to a contractor, giving them the minimum amount necessary of access or information for them to do their job.
You've used the term social engineering a lot.
Social engineering is not getting to a website and hacking your way in by inputting malicious code. I send you a link in an email saying, check out this sweet YouTube video, and you click it and you're taken to a site that either rips all your passwords.
Welcome to Deal Makers, where we get to the truth about buying boring businesses and get behind the clickbait to hear what really goes on. My guest today is Tom Codavilla. Tom and I have worked together for like 6 or 7 years now. And Tom, welcome. Please explain to our listeners who you are.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for the intro. I'm Tom Codavilla. I'm partner at SKNS Law Group. I do privacy, cybersecurity, and also work on some M&A and do outsource general counsel. But today I think we're talking about privacy.
Yeah, that's your kind of bailiwick. So you're the go-to guy in the whole region for privacy law, which is really fun to know about. It's one of the areas of the law as a lawyer that I like the most because the people with the most experience in it typically are on the younger side of the legal spectrum, right? Because if you're, 70, privacy law wasn't around when you were cutting your teeth. So you can be the actual expert, although we're not that young anymore because we've got, 13 years of experience each. But,
Goes by fast.
It goes by so fast, but still, I view us as young. One of the things that there's a lot of content out here about Tom, in case you don't follow this name, kind of Cody Sanchez, Ben Kelly, like there's a lot of folks who are going get rich by buying a boring business that runs itself. Trust me, I do it, and it's the classic thing where the guy sells books telling you how to get rich, but he gets rich selling a book and not everyone can sell books. So the whole concept of this little podcast channel is to explain to people before you do that and you're going to have to actually run a business, and it can be really hard. And one of the biggest things that I think is involved in running a business after you buy it is not like relaxing on your yacht because now you've done what you're supposed to do and you've got these businesses just writing you checks. It's like you have to learn how to run a business, and compliance is huge in running a business. We're lawyers, so of course we kind of think about that maybe a little bit sooner. But one of the I'm going to use some like jargon that I hear a lot from MBA grads and ETA, entrepreneur through acquisition folks, is levers that they want to pull. So a lot of my clients, when I specialize, in accounting practice buyouts, a lot of folks come in and say, I'm going to pull this lever. One of the levers you can pull is raising how much your clients pay, right? Raise rates. Immediately increases cash flow. Even if if you get really aggressive with it, you could say, some people do this, this does pan out, like we're going to double rates. And even if we lose half the clients, we've gained a lot because our overhead has gone down. So that's a really obvious lever. But the second in line is we're going to offshore. So we raise rates, we're going to offshore, we're going to take people remote, and we're going to bring in labor from, other countries overseas and reduce costs that way. And it's so much easier said than done for a million kind of reasons that are just operational, but you can't skate past compliance. In the accounting world, people call me a lot and say, hey, does Section 7216 apply to me because I'm going to offshore labor? And there's even problems with the question because 7216 applies even to contractors that are domestic. So you usually should have already been complying with it. And Also, that's not the end of the inquiry, right? Like, so Section 7216 says that you have to get informed notice and consent in very specific ways from your client before you can share their information if you're a tax preparer. If you're using that information and you're offshoring it, or you're getting a contractor to help you with the tax preparation, you have to get this consent. And what's so scary about it is how specific it is. You know, that you have to have a term, you have to say things, it has to be signed. You can't just embed it, some language in the middle of your engagement letter. Like, it has to have its own page. All of these things that are really specific, look at it for more information. But the other thing that's really scary about it is it just like casually drops in jail time. It's like plus criminal penalties of a year in prison, or, you know, whatever it says, which the fact that many people have never even heard of 7216 ever, and that it involves jail time, is pretty scary. And then it also leads me to my favorite, like, kind of imaginary scenario where I picture like everyone in orange jumpsuits, very scary, in prison, and being like, "What you in for?" And they're like, "Well, I didn't get consent for overseas labor in my accounting firm." What an absurd outcome. But if anybody has ever seen anyone go to jail for this, please let me know. I would love to hear that anecdote and write to them in prison. Tom, if like above and beyond 7216, right? That only applies to tax preparers. So there's a lot of stuff in the umbrella of what I do, whether it's payroll or bookkeeping or advisory work, or, you know, people are just using VAs, that 7216 might not apply to. And the reason I really wanted to have you on is people say, cool, 7216 doesn't apply, so I don't have to do anything. And that is not the takeaway. The takeaway is, okay, so all of the other laws apply. And you're here to tell us a little bit about the other laws that apply when you're bringing in that kind of labor.
Yeah, like you said, 7216 is under the umbrella of use of information for tax preparation services. Any use of the information gathered for tax preparation purposes, other than for the preparation of those returns, takes us out of 7216. So let's say you're offshoring to the Philippines. Because the data is, or the information is leaving the United States, automatically we have to start thinking about what foreign laws could apply to that data. And there are a couple of buckets that I think about when I hear about offshoring. First is, who is your client and what privacy laws apply to them? So for example, they might be subject to a state or federal privacy law that says you have got to make every subcontractor or contractor that handles your information abide by certain privacy laws, and that has to be in a written contract. So if you offshore, you might unwittingly need to get a contract with that offshore provider that adheres to the standards that your client is subject to. We would see this in a case like GDPR. Let's say you are doing returns for foreign employees. You're in the US. GDPR, the EU GDPR, has a provision that requires consent for onward transfers to different countries, depending on the country. So you might actually need to get a GDPR compliant data processing addendum with that offshore subcontractor. The other bucket that I think about is applicable law in the country that you're offshoring it to. So places like the Philippines, India, they have their own national consumer data privacy laws. They're not as strict as, say, the GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act, but they do still exist. So in thinking about those two buckets, the question you have to ask yourself is, what data privacy laws apply to both my clients and my offshore service providers outside of 7216? And a good way to trigger that thought in yourself is, well, are my offshore service providers going to do anything apart from just process this data for tax preparation purposes? If that offshore service provider is going to do marketing, if they do bookkeeping, if they are going to help with outreach and gathering information, not necessarily just for tax preparation, but for your clients generally, that all falls outside of 7216's umbrella, and we've got to start thinking about applicable laws there. So that's the general framework that I would apply when thinking about, all right, what laws could apply outside of 7216?
Okay, interesting. So a lot of times, my Well, accountants who are often my clients are more risk averse. But we have clients, you and I together at our firm, who are in all different industries. And so there can be some risk takers among them. And the question that they don't always say directly, but I can tell they're thinking is something akin to who's going to know? And I like to, when I'm drafting a document, think about my audience, right? And you think you're drafting documents, and you kind of default as a lawyer as writing it as though a judge might read it. You want, first the counterparty is going to read it, first your client's going to read it, then the counterparty, and then maybe one day a judge. But that doesn't actually happen that often. Most things don't go to litigation. For contracts, really what I'm realizing as I've progressed in my career is it's like an M&A thing. When you get bought out, the buyer is going to do diligence, and they're going to have their team of big firm lawyers look at all of your documents. And as they go along, they're going to get a sense of how compliant you've been and get more aggressive with the documents that they're looking for, and more aggressive with reducing the offering on the table based on that compliance. So, judge maybe. Buyer in the future, very likely to take account of how compliant you've been with these. But when else does it come up?
M&A is a massive context, obviously, and if you're just thinking dollars and cents, that's the one most likely to come into play. But another context in which it might come up is data breach. As unlikely and as scary as it sounds, it's still worth it to prepare and try to defend against a data breach. So if you are not, for example, getting written consent from taxpayers for sharing of their information outside of the tax preparation context, or let's say you offshore the data and the offshore provider has a contractor that leaks the data, sells the data, it would be extremely unfortunate for your business if you weren't contractually protected and couldn't at least get a bit of the money spent on data breach remedy services back from that offshore contractor. In the question of who's going to know, in most situations outside of the M&A context, if there is no data breach, it's kind of unlikely that anybody's going to notice that you don't have the appropriate data protection agreements in place. However, in the 1%, 0.5% chance that a data breach does happen, that you are non-compliant in some other visual way, somebody starts asking questions. If you have a disgruntled client who wants to say, you know what, delete all my information because I just got a piece of marketing from somebody that I don't recognize and you're the only person that has the information that triggered that marketing, then in that small remote possibility, you have a very large problem. And it's not just talking to that one taxpayer, that one client that thinks that their data may have been misused. As soon as that complaint gets made, you're going to have to disclose it either in M&A or as part of diligence with any other transactional team or with an attorney who just knows what they're talking about. That will probably trigger an internal inquiry either by a lawyer or somebody conscientious in your organization that's going to probably reveal that we don't have a lot of protections in place. If you're, for example, trying to get cyber insurance, a cyber insurer will ask, do you have data protection agreements in place? Who handles all this data? Are they contractually bound to confidentiality and to make you whole if they mess up and breach your data? I used to be one of those big firm lawyers that would very calmly ask any acquisition target about their compliance procedures. It's just a part of diligence that you do. And it's always hard to hear somebody who's trying to sell a business panic and say, we don't have any of that. I didn't know that we had to do this. I didn't know that we had to have written contracts that protect our information. And unfortunately, a lot of times it benefits buyers because that can lead, as you said, to a large price reduction because of potential non-compliance with privacy laws. And I'm happy to get into which specific privacy laws might carry the highest risk if you are trying to sell your business, but I'm sure we'll get to that eventually.
That's yeah. And my purchase agreements have a little bit of expounded by virtue of our experiences on the reps and warranties that I ask from sellers on, like, it's very standard though. I mean, the standard documents say there's a rep and warranty saying I own my business. There's a rep and warranty saying I'm not being sued. And there's a rep and warranty saying I'm abiding by all data privacy laws in all jurisdictions in which they apply. And so that often, more than the others, leads to a question from the seller going, what?
Yeah.
What is the data privacy law? I have this server that's covered in dust in this room. And on rare occasion, unfortunately, I also have a seller who's had a breach or a ransomware event, and they're not really sure the extent of it. And I mean, it really can tank their ability to sell their business. So, yeah, talk a little bit about the worst offenders there. And, one thing I always say to my clients, and I'm from Tennessee, so it's colloquial, but is like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So don't get breached, you know? Like, don't be silly, and train your employees not to be silly. Tom and I had a funny phishing attempt yesterday that we were laughing about, where people just email you and pretend like they're somebody you work with, the classic, like, could you get me some Visa gift cards and send me pictures of it and that kind of thing. I mean, it happens all the time to us, and I'm sure it happens to most employees as well. So if you've got employees, you need to train them on it. Like, try to not have an unsecured server. Like, do all of those normal safeguarding things. Also comply with the legal protections.
Yeah, just most recently, I went through a couple of data breaches with clients, and they were both caused by third-party contractors that weren't adequately prepared and contracted with to protect personal information. One was an outside developer shop that just straight up left a port open during development through which anybody who knew how to find that port could access all of the data, including credit card numbers, email addresses, account logins, unencrypted. And it's a nightmare scenario, but it's so common. And when you contract with a third-party service provider and you make it very clear how important data protection is to your business, and you regularly check up on their data hygiene, their access to your system, you keep access to your specifically sensitive information separate and encrypted, you reduce that risk. And what happened in this data breach situation was essentially they had to cancel a deal. They were trying to get bought and they couldn't because there was this massive overhang of all of their customers' information having been out there floating on the internet for anybody to access. And the hard part about that is that when data is so far removed from your system, when you give a contractor access in that way, it's hard to tell who even has seen that information. So there's this big unknown. At least if somebody comes in and breaches your system, you can see, all right, they logged in here, here's the intruder, here's the IP address. But with contractor information, because you don't have visibility into their systems and maybe they don't even track that kind of access, you don't know who has that information. You have to go looking for it on the dark web, and that's a bit expensive. So that's a really hard thing to see and something that you've got to manage. Another data breach situation I found with one of my other clients was that essentially a third-party service provider who was helping transfer data from one system to another had created a temporary file into which all the information was dumped before it was transferred. They forgot to delete that file.
Oh.
And that file was just hanging out. And unfortunately, well, I guess somewhat fortunately, that file was in AWS, but there are bots that scrape the internet and just go around looking for these kinds of open AWS buckets and then are set to automatically download whatever they find. So if you're using a contractor, especially an offshore, who are probably going to use some sort of global platform like AWS, it doesn't end with just contracting with them and saying, all right, here's access to our data. You've got to continuously check up on how they're using it. There are certain principles like least access and data minimization.
I was
So
just about to
give
say,
your,
like, that ounce of prevention, right? Like, that's fantastic. Talk about those. Data minimization in
yeah,
particular.
Yeah. And I mean, the dirty secret of being a privacy lawyer who was not also a computer software engineer is that when I talk about cybersecurity and best practices, technically, I don't know how to do this. I am just a lawyer who has seen a lot of stuff go wrong. But in principle, when you are provisioning data to a contractor, you should think about giving them the minimum amount necessary of access or information for them to do their job. So if I am trying to engage somebody to do marketing, I'm just going to give them people's email addresses. I'm not going to give them their social security numbers. So that's the principle of data minimization, or yeah.
Well,
So that's the principle. Sorry, go on.
that's the thing we see a lot on even any small business is it'll say, I mean, simple things like contact form, right? The contact form on your website will say first name, last name, phone number, address, email address. And is that necessary? You know, do you really want all that information or do you just want their email address? It could be anybody. Sometimes I've seen them say date of birth, and you're like, why? Why are you asking for this information? You're not going to protect it or control it. So I think realizing why am I actually requesting this? Is this necessary? Am I using it? If so, how? Is really important, and certainly not transferring the whole file that you have on somebody with all of their for instance in payroll, right? That's a really tricky one, and I'd love your thoughts on that because a lot of clients will have businesses and they're doing payroll for a lot of other businesses, but they don't have any contractual relationship with the employees themselves. So, where is the nexus there? And payroll, usually they take all the information. They've got your I-9 documents with your social, they've got everything. So, figuring out if you're offshoring some of that labor, what does that person actually need in order to perform the service that you're asked, the discrete task? Really important because you don't want to be sending the whole I-9 file over there if you don't have to. But
Yeah, as I was imperfectly trying to get to, the principle of data minimization is you taking in as little data as possible, and the principle of least access can be thought of as you sharing out the least amount of information necessary to accomplish the task. And the important thing about information that's used to prepare tax returns, but even just do payroll, which is obviously outside of 7216, is that we're talking about stuff like social security numbers, we're talking about account information, and these are all pieces of information that are sensitive, and if they're breached, they implicate state data breach laws. So as an aside, every state in the US, even if they don't have a consumer privacy law, has a data breach statute. And what they all say is basically, if you are a consumer and you've given your information to somebody, and that person, when they're processing it, somehow gets breached, there are certain pieces of information that if they were included in the breach, that data processor has to notify you. And if the breach is big enough, the state attorney general. And there are a lot of variations between the state laws. Some states care about email addresses, some states care about other pieces of information, but every single data breach law in the United States cares about social security numbers. A lot of them care about dates of birth. So when we're talking about payroll data, if it gets breached, we're talking about potentially having to notify people in a lot of states, depending on the scope of your business. And that, unfortunately, would be outside the scope of 7216.
it's an enormous compliance burden and it costs a ton of money. And sometimes you can wind up being responsible for payments, right, to the affected individuals.
Yeah, in some states, if certain pieces of information are breached, you've got to set up a call center to handle complaints. You also have to pay for credit monitoring if somebody's social combined with their name gets breached. Credit monitoring is pretty expensive. I went through a data breach with a medium-sized company that had to do credit monitoring, and they were paying about 20 grand a month for the breach of and credit monitoring for about 10,000 individuals. It is not a small expense.
No, that is not great. And I mean, it will derail your business for quite a while trying to comply with it and hire the lawyers and all of that. And I bet a lot of my small business clients or a lot of the small businesses are thinking, like, I've never heard of this. This doesn't apply to me. But it does. It comes up. It happens. It's just not something that people necessarily share when they're going through it with their fellow business owners because it's embarrassing, it's difficult, they're probably not confident that they're doing the right thing in response to it, so they're not shouting it from the rooftops.
It's really scary. I've talked to small business owners who, they're extremely successful, and one day they just get, for whatever reason, socially engineered to transfer money or data or access through clicking on a phishing link that's embedded in an email, thinking that's from a service provider, or wire instructions are another common way. And in each of those circumstances, people who are looking to buy your business don't necessarily care exactly what kind of data breach you had, but they care that the data breach occurred because it's usually indicative of lax standards within the business. And that may or may not kill the deal, but it's at least going to make diligence and purchase price a little bit tougher on the seller.
For years. And often they're going to want, a buyer will want you to maintain tail insurance coverage. And a lot of people don't even have it to cover this. Unfortunately, I get oh yeah, I've got general liability insurance or I have errors and omission insurance a lot, and that
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
always cover it.
Yeah. People think that criminal insurance or crimes generally will cover cyber crimes. It usually doesn't. There's usually an exclusion for cybercrime. It's hard to get good insurance. Usually, what I tell people when they're looking for cyber insurance is you can get your off the shelf cyber coverage, but that's not going to do much. What you really need to do with your attorney or your broker is to go through the top 5 ways that you could get breached, whether that's social engineering or a contractor leaving something open to where it gets accessed on the internet. Whatever your top 5 risks are, you need to get riders in your insurance policy for those risks. Those riders are not necessarily very expensive. If you're savvy enough to ask for them and negotiate them, they are, in my opinion, well worth the extra 10, 15% that it might cost you on insurance. The way that most insurance is structured is that if somebody hacks into your system and gets your data and they weren't supposed to have access, nobody gave them access, okay, that's covered by your basic cyber insurance. But a lot of times with breaches, what happens is your contractors or you leave the door wide open. You leave something publicly accessible to where somebody doesn't even have to hack. They can just know an address, a bot scrapes it, and the data is gone. That instance is not covered by your standard cyber insurance policy. Scary, but hey, it's an addressable risk at least.
It is. And you've used the term social engineering a lot, which I love, but it's just a term for tricking somebody.
Yeah, it's social engineering. Sorry, I'm in my cybersecurity world here. Social engineering is not just getting to a website and hacking your way in by inputting malicious code. It's I send you a link in an email saying check out this sweet YouTube video, and you click it and you're taken to a site that either rips all your passwords or your credentials, or it forces you or asks you for information that I can then use to gain access to your account. So a very common phishing scam or social engineering scam is, hey, I need you to confirm I'm Microsoft, I'm really a hacker, but I'm Microsoft, please confirm your credentials, your password's about to expire. You go, you type in your credentials, you click, nothing happens, and you go, oh, that's weird, and you just kind of forget about it. And then, at some point later, maybe it's immediately, maybe it's days later, somebody gets access to your MSN account. So yeah, that's social engineering. That's why every time you hear somebody talk about the latest and greatest encryption, there's usually a way around it because people are fallible. No matter how good your technical system is, people are usually the easiest way in, unfortunately.
Well, and so many of these buying boring business folks are more tech forward folks bringing and buying older businesses because there's 13 million small businesses that are coming on the market as boomers age and retire. So there's a ton of opportunity there, but it's a lot of younger folks. I'm pointing at myself, but like we've already addressed that we're like questionably young now.
I
But
think we're middle. We're
you
in the middle. We're not old.
compared to retiree, like coming online, they're bringing like tech plans and tech future and tech savviness to an older business and things that are second nature to those buyers. They need to explain to the employees that they're acquiring. So it's not uncommon for me to have buyers who are buying a business where there's no email relationship with the clients. And that's a first thing that they're starting is like, okay, well, we're going to create a portal so people can upload documents. We're going to start emailing our clients. Maybe they don't even have email addresses, but if they do have them, they're not using them. If you're asking, Brenda or Sam, who's like doing the front desk for 35 years, to start using the computer in the closet that you've drug out for the first time, like you need to stop and explain what's going on. And prepare for the fact that they're going to be first timers on a lot of this type of thing that we immediately disregard. Like yesterday, I got the email from somebody pretending to be our partner, Mike, and being like, I need to update my payroll information, right? I mean, it's very easy to hover over the email and know that it's phishing some random email address. And it's very easy to know that there's not a FedEx package waiting for me that I need to call about, or Amazon hasn't, erroneously charged me $20,000 and I have to call in the next 10 minutes, or it's going to be irreversible. Like all of that is second nature to people who are raised with this technology, but a lot of folks are in this enclave where they just don't have any experience with it. And social engineering is by far and large the most likely like gaping vulnerability and the cheapest to close because it's just education.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, part of the reason that phishing and social engineering attempt failed yesterday is that we're a small organization. But as you scale, as you cease to know how exactly everybody else sounds in email, as you get more employees, you're dealing with more stuff. That stuff is easy to go by the wayside, right? The basic blocking and tackling of I need to verify this request. I need to look at every email that I get and see, do I trust this sender? Is there anything unusual about it? Those things get harder at scale, and that's why as you scale, there are service providers that can kind of remotely do that kind of security for you and that filtering of outside emails. And even the training. I work with some clients who send out regular phishing emails to their employees as part of security awareness training, and they've just contracted with a company to send fake phishing emails. So when the employee clicks on the fake phishing email, then they get notified by the third-party security trainer that's saying something like, yeah, you fell for this. And if you fall for this once a quarter or even once a year, then you've got to go through this online slideshow training you about social engineering and how to avoid falling for it, which it's actually a pretty cheap solution if you don't want to pay somebody to come in and teach technical literacy.
I like that as a solution a lot. I think we would probably, benefit from it if we grow even just a little bit more. Because you're right. We know each other. It's very easy to recognize it coming down the pike. Even some operational challenges that happen with. I had a client. Professional services is about the sale of goodwill, right? So name and domain name for your website and all of that's really important. But somebody didn't update, they didn't have their Squarespace template that their website was on auto updating. And people are just every single Squarespace template website type. People are just trying to find a vulnerability in all the time, and they find them and then they update it. But so they hadn't had it updated. There was a vulnerability found, and their website just got taken over, and just ransomed. Like, yeah, you can have it back if you pay us a bunch of money. And that's not necessarily a data breach, but it's incredibly challenging to deal with because that's your domain, that's your website, that's your goodwill. You can't sell. And similarly, I'm not really sure actually because you're the specialist on this, but I had a seller who had a big data breach and it was ransomed, and they just deleted everything. They were like, we're just going to delete everything. And so then they went to sell, but they have no historical files. So the buyer's having to remake like
Oh,
first
wow.
day ever, new returns for everybody, pull the IRS transcripts to see what the tax returns are for every single client
Oh,
and just build from scratch. And operationally, that's devastating.
oh man.
And I'm not sure that that was even I doubt that they complied with all of their obligations in that instance that they should have. Plus, they, by virtue of it, failed to comply with some of probably their professional regulations regarding the retention of data. So,
Yeah, that's definitely a data breach. Getting ransomed, the standard definition of data breach includes the loss or unavailability of key data. And that's tough because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't just run IRS transcripts through like an AI data ingester and recreate the returns.
no,
That's a pretty manual process.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And
that's tough.
that happens around retirement time, which, there's all of these, it's like 75% of CPAs are over 65 and, all this. And that's really just business owners at this point. They're getting older. They're the most vulnerable for it. Then you go from being able to sell your company for a couple $1,000,000 to being more likely to just close up shop and run and hope nothing
Yeah.
chases you.
Or hand somebody the keys to take over. I'm
Yeah.
dealing with a client right now that's just tired. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ransomware stuff, you can also, if somebody gets access to your website and tries to ransom access to it, cyber insurance will in some cases pay those ransoms if you've got a specific rider
Interesting.
for it. Yeah. Those are a little bit harder to get. And if you go asking for ransomware coverage, your insurer will probably say, exactly why would somebody want to ransom your website? But for, with client portals makes total sense. And I think that the insurance industry sees accounting as a pretty low risk industry. It's not like you are trying to use AI to predict specific sensitive traits about people like some of my other clients. So your clients might benefit a bit from cyber insurance on the perception that accounting is a more stable and less risky business. But the crazy thing is, right, we've been talking for about 30 minutes about how privacy law applies, and this is all outside of 7216,
Right.
right? So I know we've turned into something of a discussion of like just privacy and cybersecurity in general, but I think that's useful for your listeners because these are all potential applicable laws once we step outside of our little box of tax preparation.
Yeah, it doesn't have like laws in order to apply to your business don't have to specifically be for your industry. So,
Yeah,
if you didn't commit murder, it doesn't mean you didn't commit a whole bunch of other crimes. So,
right. Yeah.
this binary viewpoint, I think, like my initial argument was 7216 didn't get enough coverage, and now I'm thinking, it's gotten too much. It's not 7216 or Wild Wild West. It's like there's a lot else going on there. And a lot of folks are also kind of aggregating different business models and adding in wealth management or, they
Mhm.
have big platforms of different industry types. And as they're, growing, this is just going to be so significant. So I really appreciate your feedback. What else would you say if you're buying a business and you're probably stepping into the shoes of a non-compliant, insecure technological era?
To a buyer who's buying a business, I'd say take your time and diligence and really get access to the system and try to construct a map, ideally written down, of how data is ingested, who has access to it, how it's secured, where it's stored, if it's transferred to third parties, do those third parties have contracts that bind them to confidentiality and security, and make sure that if the contractor messes up, they are paying to make the business whole. Once you've got that data map, then you can see where the gaps are and you can assess for yourself how expensive it might be to close those gaps. Pretty much nobody has a data map written down, even though data mapping is a key component of any privacy law compliance regime. So if you're savvy enough to try to map that data, you're going to find gaps and you're going to be well positioned moving forward as opposed to buying the business and then after when the seller's checked out and maybe some key employees have left going, wait, where's this data? Where's the data? Who has access to it? Oh, didn't we have a guy do some work on the website a couple of years ago? Are we sure that he did that correctly? Are we sure that that's secure? Do we have to run a pen test to check? So yeah, data privacy and data mapping is definitely something to do up front. Everything starts from a data map. The first thing, let's say you call me and you say, I think there's some serious privacy issues here. The first thing I'm going to say is, all right, let's map your data. Who's got access to it? Just think of it like a straight line or like a series of flow charts. Data comes in, data gets processed, data goes out. You need to know each one of those steps and ideally write it down so that you can refer to it. And that's useful in data breach as well, right? Oh, somebody got our socials, no problem, they're encrypted in this separate bucket. Or, uh-oh, we've got all of our taxpayer information in an unsecured spreadsheet on Google Drive. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. So,
Yeah.
don't do that. Well, thanks, Tom. This has been great. How can people find you if they have privacy questions?
Oh, cool. This is like a little shout out at the end. I've never been asked to do this, so this is fun. You can find me at Codavilla at skndslegal.com. So just my last name, like the word code and the word villa at skndslegal.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you,
And
Sarah.
deal makers, like and subscribe if you got value out of this content.